Oh my gosh. It
Oh,
is hilarious. I'm sorry.
that's great. Today, we're going to be talking about how to find, keep, or leave a relationship. I'm Cora Naylor, certified coactive coach and emotion code practitioner. As a coach for empty nesters, one of the challenges we often come up with is spousal relationships and how that will work now that the kids are grown. Or for single parents, maybe perhaps finding a new partner. To give us some tips on that, I've invited Judith Jameson to join us today. Judith is a relationship coach. She helps men and women excel in the three main areas of love: dating to find a spouse, repairing and restoring a marriage, once she has a spouse, or navigating the confusion and losses of a separation or divorce. Judith combines her expertise of life coaching and paralegal, as well as extensive training in suicide awareness and prevention and assistance for victims in domestic violence. So, welcome, Judith.
Well, hey. Thank you for
Yeah,
having me on.
excited.
That's
I'm
right.
sure you'll have some amazing tips for us because I know relationships after kids can be a challenging time. Often, you know, spouses are looking at each other after the kids go and kind of like, what, who are you? Right? Yeah.
Right. And that's, you're absolutely right. That's so typical. And they actually call that, they've coined the phrase down here anyway in the Boston area as the gray divorce syndrome. And insinuating that we're all gray once our kids go to college. It's like, yeah, well, actually, based on all the upbringing issues we had, we probably are having gray hair after our kids leave.
Yeah.
But it's a whole phenomena that you know that we haven't seen as much of until the last 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So, aside from your formal training, what
Hmm.
sort of sets you apart from other life coaches?
Yeah. So I combine my training with my life experience, and the reason why I have pretty deep knowledge of what goes on in a marriage or a divorce, as well as the dating, because I've done all of it pretty extensively,
Oh,
not on purpose. Uh, but as you and I were talking when we first started to get to know each other, I'm very transparent. With people I meet, who I talk to about what I do, but also with my clients, and that sets me apart because, as you know, with a therapist or a family practitioner, even your own doctor, they don't really share their own personal journeys because they're kind of trained not to. Right? That's the whole thing. It's like you can have a bedside manner, but only to a point. And so I am allowed to do that as a coach, that I can share my past. And I have pretty deep experience in the divorce area as well as remarriage because I myself am on my third marriage. And so I bring that to my clients. What makes that even more unique is I've been married with a child, married with stepkids, and now I'm remarried with someone that had never had kids.
oh wow.
Yeah, so it sort of runs the gamut, but I also understand what it's like to, reach this age myself where, my current husband and I are looking around going, now what? Because my son's launched in his 20s.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So you can really relate to everybody
right,
with those experiences. That's amazing.
right. And then I
Yeah.
also run, I think we may have talked about this, I run support groups as well, a couple of nights a week. So I'm working with men and women that are dealing with all these issues a couple of nights a week.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And I guess that's online these days.
They are. I send people a Zoom link and they can join that way.
Oh, awesome. That's
Yeah,
great.
once they pre-register. Yeah.
Yeah. And so how did you make that leap from, working in the legal field into this coaching, relationship coaching?
Right. So that's kind of an interesting story that led me into, working with people in relationships, either people that are in a relationship, fixing it or not fixing it, or trying to find a relationship. It's like
Mm.
some people would like to have some relationship issues. I'm like, okay, let's have at it. Let's find you a man or a woman that you can, have some nice, healthy interchange and arguments with. Um, but I had changed careers in my late 30s, early 40s to the paralegal area. And because my background is in corporate marketing and public relations, I just assumed I would work in corporate law. But as it turned out, I landed in different types of law, but not family law, which I did not want because after my divorce, I'm like, I'm not doing anything in family law. But I was working for a firm. The first couple of there were a few firms that I worked for where there were divorce attorneys, family law attorneys in there, and it was the aha moment. One night on the way home, I just kind of snapped emotionally, and it was all related to the things that I was hearing those family law attorneys talking about, no joke, in the hallways or while they were getting their coffee in the kitchen. And what they were talking about is how idiotic their clients were. Like, oh my gosh, this woman just left, and I can't believe she doesn't realize that she doesn't automatically get alimony. I mean, how stupid is that? Well, seeing that that used to be the way, and a lot of people do still get alimony, depending on how it's sliced up, it's really not a stupid thing to think you might, you know? So I really didn't like the way they were talking about people, and I decided I needed to get in and try to help these people.
Yeah. So you're kind of more of a mediator for people because, and the rules change all the time too. So, I
They do.
mean, we just watch TV or something, we see all these things that are happening, or what's happening with our friends, but laws change, the processes change. And you'd think that the lawyer's going to kind of help you figure some of that stuff out to navigate that. But obviously, you know, some help is required for people. And it's such an emotional time.
Right.
Going,
And the thing is, yeah, and the reality is, especially when we're really in reference to empty nesters. So if we tie it back to that, um, you have people that are in marriages that have just sort of flatlined, which theoretically happens way before the kids go to college. But what happens is people don't know what to do with that, and they certainly aren't going to tell their friends about it because they're embarrassed. It's a really difficult place to find yourself in because you don't know what kind of help is out there, and you're not really sure you want to get a divorce. But once you go to a divorce attorney, that can often set the course. That can sort of get things going that way.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, so it's important. Like what I love about what I do is it's like, look, let's talk about it. How bad is it? Um,
right.
you know, you're looking at this person going, all right, other than like an occasional walk or a vacation, I have nothing to talk to you about. And so really with those kinds of clients, I think it's wonderful to work with people like this because whether I'm working with the husband or the wife, they can go back in and I can coach them into their marriage. And eventually, if it doesn't start this way, I can usually get the other spouse to come in.
Right.
And what we're really doing is hitting a reset button and trying to basically, I'm having these people date each other again.
Yeah, I
You
think
know,
that's really
yeah,
important, and it's easy to get out of that. Like, if you don't keep that going while you're raising your kids, and
yeah,
now all of a sudden it's like you've both gone, and my husband did that to a degree too. We've really developed our own kind of hobbies and things that we did, and not necessarily stuff that we did together. So it's
right,
easy to get into that routine. So, what are some tips that you can share
right.
with people to help them navigate that?
Right. So one of the first things that I have all my clients do is create a list. And it's a pros and cons list. And until you really look at what the positive things are as well as the things that you don't like in your marriage or your relationship, you can't really step off and work on what needs to be worked on. The other thing is if we don't, I hate to say it, but it's sort of like, count your blessings. Um, until people take a hard look at, sometimes if they look at at the list, they're sort of like, wow, there's actually more positives in here than I thought. And the negatives, when I'm working with a client, the negatives can often be turned around, but you can't turn them around if you don't have a list that you're checking off. So in other words, you know how you take a trip and you forget like your favorite shoes and you forget the dress that you really wanted to wear every night out because it's a comfortable one that has room for food. Right. So it's the same thing with going on a trip, which I'll call it going on a trip to work on your marriage or to assess what you're going to do with it. If you don't have a list, like a packing list, you're going to forget that you need to be putting in the dress and the shoes, and the favorite book. So it's the same thing with the list. If you don't have a list that you start working on and checking off, you're going to fail because you're not working toward
Yeah,
helping the things in the negative column. So
yeah.
that's the biggest tip is to write them all out and then start working on the easiest one. Kind of
That's
like
a great idea.
the Dave Ramsey finance plan, right? You don't start with the
Right.
big bill, you start with the little one.
Right. And it's so important because it's easy to get in that headspace of the grass is always greener on the other side, and you forget like everybody in the world has annoying habits,
Right.
right? So if you're going to get out of this relationship, the next person's going to have annoying habits too. You just don't notice them at the beginning when you're in the fun stage.
Right.
So I think that
Exactly.
that idea of writing everything down really helps clarify, what you have, and whether that's something that you
Right.
can work with for sure.
Right. And the other thing is when somebody gets to the point where they do want to tackle it and they want to talk to their spouse or their significant other, I always coach people and say the best way to do it is to wait until you're having a good moment, like not
Mhm.
in the middle of a TV show or something, but like dinner's really good because if it gets really bad, you can just start eating and stuff your face and not you can't talk, right? Or you have like a drink with a straw in it, so you have to go sip your straw. You can't keep talking. But the way to start the conversation is, hey, you know what? I've been thinking of some, and you're gonna start with the positives, right? I mean, I've been thinking about some things that I just wanted to let you know. Like, I really loved it when we used to play tennis. Or, hey, you know what? I was thinking about, you know, when little Johnny and Jill were, at home, like it was just really hard for us to go to Europe. We would just take a short trip for family vacations. But now that they're in school or now that they've left and they've got apartments, like, I'm just making this up. We
Yeah,
really liked that trip to London.
yeah,
How about we go again? Why don't we do that again? And this time, like, we don't have to take the kids. So you have to think of the positives to start the conversation with. Because if you sit there and you tackle the negatives, like, I don't like how you snore and you gained a lot of weight, you know, and you watch too much TV, like, your spouse is not really going to respond well to that.
yeah. And also ask them what they maybe they have ideas that they haven't
Right,
voiced either.
right.
I think that often happens. Yeah,
Right. And
right.
the other tip too is to have a pen and paper with you because again, I like lists and I like concrete things. If you don't write them down, you might forget the one thing that your spouse thought was really a cool idea. And then 2 weeks later, when you go to talk about it again, or hopefully like a few days later, if you don't mention that, if you don't discuss those 3 or 4 things that they came up with, like you said, their ideas, they're going to think that you're the most callous person that really doesn't care because you didn't even remember. You didn't remember like the thing about the bicycling that they said.
Right.
So you
Yeah.
have to write it down.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Now
Yeah.
we've got a couple minutes left. So what do you
Okay.
have? What are your tips of for people that are single? Now
Mhm.
they're the empty nester, then they're single, and maybe they'd like to have a relationship. What kind of tips can you give them to help them
Right.
find
Okay.
somebody, meet somebody?
Yeah. So that's a blast. I love working with single men and women. The empty nesters are fun in particular because they don't have the same restrictions as someone with a 3-year-old, right?
Mhm.
However, my number one tip is just as you would do with your 3-year-old and 8-year-old, you do, once you start dating, let's assume you do have some dates, do not bring them home and introduce them to your adult children. People make the big mistake of assuming, well, they're 28 years old, they can handle it, right? Or for goodness sakes, my kids are 23 and 25. Of course I don't. They know I'm going to date. Just knowing that you might date again doesn't mean that's not like a full hall pass. That's
Yeah.
not a hall pass that says they want to meet them. They just want you to like get a life. So a lot of times adult children feel very guilty about the fact that their adult parents don't have a life, that they're whittling away doing nothing except maybe, knitting mittens all winter or whatever, right? And kids feel guilty of all ages when they've moved on and they've left the house, and the single mom or the single dad who's divorced or widowed or what have you, they feel bad. It makes them feel bad to see that you don't have a life. So you owe it to yourself and you owe it to them because they're secretly wishing that you had a life. And
Mhm.
without that, they feel very guilty and they feel like they can't cut the apron strings very easily. So don't it's great to say, that you can tell your adult kids that you're at a certain point you can tell them, but remember kids are your kids, they're not your friends. So it's not okay to share everything. Even if they ask, don't do it because they may regret asking you later. So treat it like they're your kids and you can tell your best friend about your dating adventures, but don't tell your kids because it's very hard on them. And the other thing is, if you introduce them to someone who you really like, you know, say Bob meets somebody online and he's like, hey, you know, I've been dating this woman, Megan. I invited her to dinner tonight. Well, so what? Even though it's been 6 months, like, you guys could still break up after 6 months. That's kind of, it's
Yeah.
just not a good idea. And everybody makes that mistake.
Right.
Yeah, because the adult kids might actually like Emily and they're going to be pretty mad or sad when they don't see Emily at Christmas,
Yeah.
right? So don't
Yeah.
assume that your adult kids can handle more than, look at every adult child as being just like a 5-year-old. If you wouldn't do it with your 5-year-old, don't do it with your 28-year-old.
Yeah.
So that's a major tip. The other tip with finding, you know, going out in the dating world, especially if they're, certainly if they haven't done it in a while, um, you know, the hard reality is it's all online. The chances of you meeting somebody through a friend or your cousin or church or in the grocery store, it's just not going to happen. It's just not. The odds are so, you have a better chance of getting hit by, you know, run over by a turtle than you have, you know, meeting someone through a friend. It just rarely happens.
Right.
So you cannot sit around waiting for that. You have to go online and you have to try dating online.
Yeah.
It's
So you got to
hard though.
put yourself out there. Yeah. Yeah. I know there's a lot of, yeah, I have some friends that have done it, and I have lots of friends that have met people that way too, but you have to, you know, it takes some practice meeting people and kind of figuring out how to sort them out. Well,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You really, it takes some time. And the key thing is it's not for the faint of heart. I mean, you have to be strong. You have to realize that, you know, that expression, which I love, just not to sound like I'm so cool, but, you know, ghosting
Yeah.
happens on these dating websites all the time. So you could be having a great chat with a guy or a woman for like weeks, which I don't recommend in my coaching practice. I have them pick up the phone right away. I'm like, you're not going to
Mm,
text back and forth or email someone for 3 months. That's a waste of time.
yeah.
You want to pick up the phone and see if you can connect verbally. You know, if they sound normal, if you know how to, what kinds of things do they talk about. It's, you know, um, but yeah, it's just, it's not for the faint of heart, and it's a numbers
Yeah.
game. So you
Yeah.
cannot
That's a
settle.
good idea.
You can't settle on the first person you meet.
Yeah, that's a good idea. At least if you can talk to a real person, then you
Mhm.
kind of have a better idea if it's somebody that you actually want to meet in person. Great.
Right, right.
Well,
But it's a numbers game. You don't want to say, oh, you know, the second person that you see that starts chatting with you, you know, you don't want to put all your eggs in that basket,
yeah,
because then Mr. or Mrs. Right probably slid right by you because you spent so much time chatting with one person for 2 weeks or 2 months. I mean, I see
right,
people do this for months before it finally blows up, and then they're back to square one again.
right. Awesome. Well,
Mhm.
thank you so much for
Sure.
coming on today, Judith, and sharing with us. I know it was a bit of an adventure getting you on here today, but we did it.
Yep.
Um,
Right.
and if anybody wants to connect with Judith, as you can see on the screen, we've got both my website and Judith's website running along, so you can reach out to her. If you're an empty nester and you need some help getting through empty nesting, reach out to me. Or if you want to join my Facebook group, just comment below with the yes, and we'll get you added in so that you can be around other women empty nesters and find out more about the videos that we've got coming up in the next few weeks. So thanks
Awesome.
again, Judith, and we'll be seeing you soon, everybody. Bye-bye.
All right. Great. Thanks a lot.